Okay, so we're recording.
Okay.
And hi, Lenny.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good, Ephraim. How are you?
You're Lenny Waller, who a member of a leather SM community for many years.
Yeah.
And why don't you give us a little background about who you are?
Okay, I'm Lenny Waller. My interest in fetish, S&M, B&D probably goes back to my junior high school days when you could still buy those great paperback books on 42nd Street for 95 cents, $1.25, $2, $3 was a big book. Uh, and those days you really only had to be like 18 to get in, so everybody had phony ID then. You used it in the bar, you used it to get into the X-rated movies, you used it to get into the bookstores, and I was lucky. I had a mustache and I looked older. So I didn't often get kicked out. And it was funny because a young lady, and I'll only use her first name, Sarah, her father's a well-known actor, was in junior high 3 with me in the village, and she had experienced interest in being dominant and being into S&M, and it was like, oh boy, this is my great chance. Well, after she got me tied up and I undressed and tied up, and I figured this was great, she came at me with a bullwhip, and then it was like, am I really into this shit? It, I had to rethink it quite a bit. Then, probably by the age of, 15 or 16, I found this magazine on the newsstand. It was a quarterly publication, Pleasure, from Camden, New Jersey. And I had found this couple advertising and snuck money out of my savings account at the bank so my parents wouldn't know, replied to the ad, and they were pros and I met them. And it was okay, but really not what I was looking for. Being forced to go down on the guy didn't bother me because I was bi. But it was just not the experience I was looking for. Later on that year, I took an ad from the Village Voice, which was, quote unquote, the sex industry paper of the time, because everyone advertised on the massage. And whether you wanted an English massage, a German massage, a Russian massage, it sort of told you what you were getting.
I remember years ago at a member meeting at the National Leather Association.
Yeah, in LA.
And they had a meeting at the Nova Hotel.
Yeah.
Nova Hotel on Broadway.
Right.
And they had this woman from, I think she was in California, and she was like very famous for being like, what was her name, Nan
Burroughs?
Nan Burroughs, I think her name was. And she was basically giving an explanation like they had to put their advertising in the various papers like wanting to teach English or something like that.
Yes.
They had all these roundabout
ways of doing it. You had to decode the ads.
You had to decode the ads.
Matter of fact, I'm trying to think what the name of the organization was. Getting old, the memory goes. There was a gay organization, and I hope before the end of the interview I can think of their name.
Mattachine?
No, Mattachine was the Mattachine Society was for people coming out. This was a contact meeting organization. And they did everything in letter and number codes. And after you joined, they sent you the copy of the codes. You almost felt like somebody with a Dick Tracy decoder ring. You had to read the letter and the number and then look it up on the chart to see what the person was into.
It's almost like a communist conspiracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of the name of it.
I first met you, I believe, like, it was partly national, what was it, Oil and Spiegel.
Oil and Spiegel.
And I remember the first time I went to a place called the Hellfire Club was
Yes.
for a meeting of the Oil and Spiegel Society. They had a meeting there one
We had some of their meetings in the early days.
in the early 80s.
Right.
I
We
think, like-
also held meetings with National Leather Association, LSM, GMSMA, Jovian Gentlemen, Hot Ash, Foot Friends, a number of groups.
I remember that first night, it was like, okay, the meeting was over and somebody was having a wedding, and I think it was a guy named Wolf was having a wedding. The bride wore black leather. He had tattoos, and
Right, Wolfie.
people were walking around spanking and naked, and it was like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah.
When did Hellfire first open up? About what
Well,
year?
actually, it was in the late 70s, but in the late 70s it was gay. Before it was Hellfire, if I can regress a little past that to history, across the street, 400 West 14th Street, on the top floor, was the toilet. It was a gay bar, and they had two swings over the bar, and naked young studs swinging on the swings, and people gathering at the bar, and it was sex, and it was a tiny little space on the top floor of this building, and of course no liquor license, and every 6 months or so you'd get busted, of course they're doing business in New York. And when they finally got closed, they said, we opened up what was known as the sewer, which was way predecessor to Hellfire, which, if you remember the early Hellfire, or the sewer, or the catacombs, was downstairs at 28 9th Avenue, underneath Jay's, and there were two doors. There was a front door closer to 13th Street, and in the middle of the block, at those days there was still a shed on 9th Avenue. And in the middle of the shed there was another door, and the reason for that door is the other side of that wall was the back door of Jay's Hangout. But Jay's didn't officially have a back door. Years ago it was a German bar, and that led out onto the street. It was all glass paneled. Subsequently, the shed went up, the panels were covered in, and the roll-up door remained. And I have the picture at home, and one day I'll show it to you. Was oil painting of a nude man, which hung over this almost boarded up doorway. And it was apropos for a gay bar's back room at the time. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, they would turn the painting over. And there was an arrow on the back of the painting that said open downstairs. And as door would open, you'd go down these rickety wooden stairs, and it was really the pit area of what was Hellfire, Catacombs.
The Hellfire was originally under the street itself.
Right. But this was the back area where you may have remembered originally were mazes, and then the mazes were torn down, and there was a stage and an upper stage, a little sitting area, and later days it became a cement glory hole wall on the left. This is after you walked in the entrance, went through the main room, and went to the back, which would be
Glory
towards
hole.
the tip of 14th Street.
And I remember, it was very strange because you have all these little rooms,
Right.
and sometimes there would be a couple in the room,
Right.
two people, just sitting there talking, and all these men
would be gathering around.
climbing the walls
Well,
to
to
peek
see.
in.
Right.
And the only thing that would stop people from coming into the little cubicle was a little
chain across, right. We always did that. We said if you wanted company, leave the chain down. If you didn't want company, put it up.
And
of course, you get all the wankers standing there, I should say. And of course they'd be pressed up against the chain. It's like, give them room to breathe.
so, sometimes someone would go in the back and take a belt and whack the wall and scream,
Right,
and
and
people would come running.
People were drawn. We want to see the leather freaks. And of course, in later years, it was outlined by the famous, the infamous, and the limos parked upstairs, coming downstairs to see the leather freaks.
I remember Tiny Tim coming in.
Yes, a number of times.
Annie Sprinkle would come by.
Yes.
I think Jersey Kaczynski was said to have come by there.
And wrote a book, Pinball, based on Hellfire. And